There is a version of you that existed before the world got its hands on you, before the first time someone laughed at the wrong moment, before the first time you said what you really thought and the room went quiet in a way that taught you something dangerous, before you learned that certain feelings were acceptable and others were problems to be managed. That version of you did not yet know how to shrink. It did not yet know how to perform. It had not yet developed the intricate architecture of self-monitoring that you now carry so effortlessly you have forgotten it is weight. You learned early. The lesson arrived before you had language for it. You absorbed it through tone, through the withdrawal of warmth, through the way a caretaker's face changed when you expressed a need too loudly or at the wrong time. The lesson was simple and devastating. Who you actually are is too much, or not enough, or wrong in some way that cannot be precisely named but must be continuously corrected. And so you began the long project of editing yourself, first in small ways, swallowing the tantrum, performing the smile, nodding when you meant to shake your head. Over time, the edits accumulated into a revision so thorough that the original document became nearly inaccessible. What no one tells you is that this editing process has a neurological cost. Every time you suppress an authentic emotional response, your nervous system does not simply discard that response. It stores it. It archives it. In the body with a physiological signature, a tension in the jaw, a chronic constriction in the throat, a low-grade anxiety humming beneath every interaction that you cannot trace to a source because the source was buried so long ago, it has become part of the architecture. You are not anxious about anything specific. You are anxious because you have been living in a body that has been holding its breath for decades. The people who watched you grow up likely had no language for what they were doing. They were not, in most cases, intentionally engineering your collapse. They were transmitting the beliefs they had absorbed about acceptability, about danger, about which emotions were survivable and which were not. The mother who could not tolerate your anger was not cruel. She was a woman who had never been permitted her own. The father who disappeared when things became emotionally complex was not indifferent. He was a man who had been taught that emotional complexity was a form of weakness. They gave you what they had. And what they had was a set of adaptive strategies that helped them survive their own childhoods, but were never meant to be passed on as permanent blueprints for how to exist in the world. You received those blueprints anyway. You built a life inside them. You arranged your relationships, your ambitions, your daily rhythms around the invisible load-bearing walls of beliefs you did not choose and have never examined. And the house feels stable mostly, until it doesn't. Until you are 34 or 41 or 57 and you are standing in your kitchen at 2 in the morning, unable to explain to yourself why everything looks right and feels catastrophically wrong. This is the moment most people reach for an external explanation. The job is the problem. The relationship is the problem. The city, the body weight, the credit card debt. And sometimes those things are genuinely contributors. But there is a particular quality to the wrongness that precedes all of those explanations. A wrongness that persists even after the job changes or the relationship ends or the debt is paid. It is the wrongness of wearing a skin that was measured and cut for someone slightly different than you, not dramatically different. Just slightly, just enough that after years of wearing it, you have developed a comprehensive chronic friction that you have normalized so thoroughly you believe it is simply the sensation of being alive. You do not know that other people do not feel this way. You do not know that the low-level current of not enoughness running beneath your achievements is not a universal human condition. You assume that everyone is performing this hard and simply hiding it better. You assume that the exhaustion you feel after ordinary social interactions is a personal deficiency, rather than the predictable consequence of monitoring 40 different variables simultaneously, tracking tone, tracking facial microexpressions, tracking the temperature in the room, adjusting, compensating, translating your actual self into a more palatable version in real time, like a live interpreter who has been at the booth for 30 years with no breaks. The body keeps its own records. This is not a metaphor. The body literally encodes unprocessed experience in its tissue. The chronic tension in your shoulders that no amount of massage fully resolves. The way certain tones of voice cause a spike in your chest that bypasses your conscious mind entirely. The smell of a specific cologne or the particular quality of afternoon light in late October that fills you without warning with a grief you cannot locate or explain. These are not random. They are the filing system. They are the way a body that could not afford to consciously process an experience at the time of its occurrence stores the unfinished business for later. Later, in this context, turns out to mean indefinitely. Later means whenever you are still long enough for the body to attempt its completion. This is why stillness is difficult. When you stop moving, when the noise and the doing and the scrolling and the planning falls away, what rises is not peace. What rises is everything you have not yet felt, the grief of the relationship you survived but never mourned. The rage from the year everything was taken and you had to smile through it because falling apart was not an option. The loneliness of specific moments that occurred in rooms full of people who did not see you and whom you could not tell because you were not sure yourself what needed to be said. When the body offers you these things, you interpret it as breakdown. You think something is going wrong. You reach for the phone or the drink or the work because the feelings feel like symptoms of a crisis rather than the process of completion they actually are. You have been taught to regard emotional experience as something that happens to you, as a weather system that moves through you from outside and deposits damage. The sophisticated version of this belief is that you can control the weather through positive thinking or rigorous mindfulness or the correct dietary protocol. The cruder version is that strong people simply do not get rained on. Both versions share the same fundamental error. They position you as the passive recipient of emotional experience rather than the active participant in its creation and resolution. They suggest that the goal is to minimize the storm rather than to develop the capacity to move through it. The capacity to move through it is not built through avoidance. It is not built through the relentless optimization of external conditions until life becomes smooth enough that nothing threatens to break you open. It is built through the accumulated experience of having been broken open and having discovered that the break does not mean the end. That on the other side of the feeling there is not obliteration but ground. That grief moves through if you let it move rather than building infrastructure to redirect it. That anger metabolized becomes clarity. That loneliness sat with rather than fled from eventually reveals the difference between solitude and abandonment, a distinction that will reorganize your entire relationship with yourself. But you cannot know this until you have experienced it, and you cannot experience it as long as you are committed to not experiencing it. This is the fundamental trap. The avoidance of pain requires such a sophisticated ongoing investment of energy that the very resources you would need to begin healing are entirely consumed by the project of not needing to heal. You are so busy managing the leak that you never address the pipe. The leak management becomes your full-time occupation. You become extraordinarily skilled at it. You develop charm to preempt rejection. You develop competence to preempt criticism. You develop self-sufficiency to preempt abandonment. You become, from the outside, a highly functional person. From the inside, you are a person who has not rested in a very long time. Functionality is not the same as aliveness. This distinction is critical, and it is one that the culture you live in has almost no language for because the culture is oriented entirely around the measurable outputs of functionality, productivity, performance, the quality of your deliverables. Your interior experience is not on the spreadsheet. No one is tracking whether you actually feel the moments of your own life or whether you are moving through them like a skilled technician completing a series of tasks with great efficiency but without presence. The resume grows and the feeling of being genuinely inhabited by your own existence quietly retreats. You get better and better at life, and you feel it less and less. There is a particular sadness that attaches to this kind of success. It is not the sadness of failure. It is more disorienting than that. It is the sadness of having arrived at the destination that was supposed to fix the feeling only to discover that the feeling was never about the destination. You built the career that was supposed to make you feel worthy, and the worthiness did not arrive. You found the relationship that was supposed to end the loneliness, and the loneliness persisted, relocated to the interior of the connection itself. You assembled all of the correct components of a life, and then stood inside it wondering why the room felt so hollow, suspecting that the problem must be you, that you are constitutionally incapable of satisfaction, that you have been given everything and are still asking for something else, which makes you ungrateful, which makes you the problem. You are not the problem. You are a person who built a life around the wrong question. The world asked you what you wanted to achieve and you answered, and you pursued the answer with discipline and intelligence. But no one asked you who you were beneath the achieving. No one asked what your body felt like to live in. No one asked what you loved before you learned what you were supposed to love. No one asked which of your beliefs were actually yours, and which had simply arrived early and gone unquestioned long enough to calcify into identity. These questions were not on the curriculum. They were not considered relevant to the project. The project was to make something of yourself, and you did. But the self that was being made into something was never given the chance to be consulted. This is the source of the specific exhaustion that cannot be fixed by sleep. The exhaustion that sits beneath the physical tiredness like bedrock. It is the exhaustion of continuous self-translation, the effort of converting your actual responses, your actual preferences, your actual boundaries, into the versions that have been determined safe to present. It is the exhaustion of living at a remove from your own interior, of treating your emotional life as a management problem rather than a source of information. It is the exhaustion of maintaining a self that functions beautifully in the world, but that you cannot find when the lights go out and the performance is over and there is no one left to be functional for. What would you feel if you stopped managing the feeling? This is not a rhetorical question. It is a doorway. Most people cannot approach it directly because the anticipatory dread of what lies behind it is indistinguishable from certainty. You believe that if you stop holding the dam, you will be destroyed by what floods through. You believe this because the feeling, when it has leaked through the cracks, has felt enormous, larger than the room, larger than you. You have experienced the edges of the grief, or the rage, or the despair, and concluded from those edges that the thing itself must be unsurvivable. But the edge of a feeling is not the feeling. The anticipation of pain is not the pain. And the pain, when it finally arrives without the architecture of avoidance around it, is almost never the obliteration you feared. It is simply a feeling. Vast, yes, and dense, and real in a way that nothing in the managed life has felt real in a very long time. The strange discovery on the other side of this fear is that the feeling contains information you have been operating without. The grief tells you what you loved. The anger tells you where your boundary was and when it was crossed. The loneliness tells you not that you are unlovable, but that you have been starving yourself of the specific quality of connection that your nature requires, that you have been accepting substitutes and calling it enough. The feeling is not the enemy. The feeling is the intelligence your body has been trying to deliver for years through channels you have spent years blocking. To begin to unblock those channels does not require a dramatic dismantling of your life. It does not require a retreat or a crisis or a complete abandonment of everything you have built. It requires something far smaller and in some ways far harder. It requires a willingness to be slightly less defended in the ordinary moments. To pause before the automatic response and notice what is actually present underneath it. To allow yourself to be moved by the things that move you without immediately explaining or minimizing or converting the movement into something more palatable. To say, in the privacy of your own interior, that is painful, and to let that be true without rushing to fix it or reframe it or assign it a lesson that neutralizes its weight. You are not waiting to be saved. This is the hardest piece. Every conditioned self is oriented toward the arrival of a specific rescuer or a specific circumstance that will finally make it safe to be real. You are waiting for the relationship in which you will not need to edit. You are waiting for the financial security in which vulnerability will not feel like exposure. You are waiting for the version of yourself that is healed enough to stop hiding, not realizing that the healing and the stopping hiding are not sequential events, but simultaneous ones. You do not heal and then emerge. You emerge, and the emergence is part of the healing. The permission you are waiting for is not coming from outside. It was never located there. It cannot be granted by a parent who finally sees you, or a culture that finally makes room for your complexity, or a partner who loves you so completely that you no longer need to be anything other than what you are. Those things are beautiful when they arrive. They are not the source. You are the source. The permission to occupy your own life fully, to bring all of your intelligence and all of your feeling and all of your contradictions into the room rather than the edited summary. That permission is an act you perform, not once, continuously. In small moments, in ordinary rooms, in the unscripted spaces between the performance, when you could default to management and instead you choose presence. It will feel unsafe at first. The nervous system does not update quickly. The body that learned that authenticity was dangerous does not simply revise that learning upon intellectual instruction. It needs accumulated evidence, a long series of moments in which you were real and nothing catastrophic occurred, in which you expressed an actual feeling and the world did not withdraw, in which you held a boundary, and the relationship did not shatter, in which you allowed yourself to need something, and the need was met without punishment. This evidence accumulates slowly. There are setbacks. There are moments when the old belief is confirmed by a person or a circumstance that genuinely cannot hold your full weight. Those moments are not proof that the project is doomed. They are information about fit. They are the natural sorting process that begins when you stop contorting yourself to fit containers that were built for a smaller version of you, the life that emerges from. This process does not look like the life you planned from inside the performance. It is not necessarily larger or more impressive. It is not optimized in the ways the culture taught you to optimize. But it has a quality that the managed life almost never has. It has the quality of being actually yours. The decisions that arise from genuine self-knowledge rather than fear-driven compliance. the relationships that can hold silence as easily as conversation, the work that draws on what is actually alive in you rather than what is merely marketable, the body that you have returned to living in rather than carrying around as evidence of your continued existence. You have been waiting for the moment when it is finally safe to be here, fully here. Without the monitoring, without the translation, without the constant low-level negotiation between who you are and who you believe you are permitted to be. That moment is not a destination you reach. It is a practice you return to. Again and again, in the ordinary Tuesday of your life, in the kitchen at noon, in the conversation that could go either way, in the quiet after the noise has stopped and the question rises as it always does, asking whether you are willing, this time, to actually feel the weight and the texture and the brief impossible beauty of being the specific person you are, in this specific body, in this specific brief and unrepeatable life. The static is still there. The gap between what you feel and what you do about it remains. But now, faintly through the noise, you can hear something else. Not silence, not safety. Something older than both. The sound of a person beginning very slowly to come home.